Edward II died in mysterious circumstances. In this video we will look at the story behind his death and let you decide what happened. In 1307, Edward II became king following the death of his father, Edward I. Immediately, he called for his friend Piers Gaveston, who had been exiled by his father, and promoted him to the Earl of Cornwall. He also arrested Bishop Langton, with whom he disagreed in the past over money. Edward quickly started to create enemies of the barons of England. Soon after, he got married to Isabella of France, and when he left to get married in France, he left Gaveston in charge of the country. He was considered arrogant, reportedly stole royal funds and stole Isabella's wedding presents. It was said that England had two kings, one in name and one in deed. In other words, Gaveston was the real power and Edward listened. In 1308, violence was very likely as unrest grew in England. The barons demanded Gaveston's exile with the support from his wife Isabella and the French monarchy. Edward resisted his exile until the Archbishop of Canterbury threatened Edward with excommunication. Edward had to exile Gaveston back to France. Later in 1308, Edward secretly started to negotiate Gaveston's return to England with the Pope and the King of France. They agreed under the condition that he released Bishop Langton from prison and suppressed the Knights Templar in England. On his return, things only got worse, with Gaveston calling a powerful Earl the Dog of Warwick, and Parliament refusing to meet while the Earl of Lancaster and the enemies of Gaveston refused to attend Parliament. In 1311, Ordainers were elected to reduce the power of the King following poor governance by Edward. He continued to finance failed campaigns in Scotland, draining funds for his own household and the main problem, Gaveston. They ordered the exile of Gaveston, then he came back again. Eventually, Gaveston was captured by the Earl of Warwick and executed. Edward was furious and promised to take revenge. How long can he really survive with so many enemies? In 1321, a civil war broke out which saw Edward victorious. He responded to his victory by being an incredibly harsh ruler. Isabella left for France with her son Prince Edward to carry out negotiations with France. However, she showed no intention to return to England. It was clear at this point that she had turned on Edward and was in a relationship with Roger Mortimer, an exiled martial lord. Edward's enemies started to gather around Isabella and Mortimer. They invaded England with no resistance but were joined by many of Edward's opponents. London descended into chaos and rebelled against the government. Isabella and Mortimer took control and Edward was captured by a search party in Wales and escorted to England. The rest of his forces surrendered. He was given a choice: give up the throne and pass it on to his son, or the barons would seek an alternative king to succeed. In tears, Edward chose to abdicate and allow his son to become Edward III. Edward was then imprisoned. There were a number of people against the new government who planned to free Edward II from captivity. In April 1327, he was moved to Berkeley Castle as this was a more secure location. One rescue attempt from his former knights managed to break in all the way up to the prison into the castle, so Edward was then moved from castle to castle to avoid any breakout attempt. Later that year, in September, a message was given to Edward III that his father had died in his cell. Some say he died of natural causes and his body taken to Gloucester Abbey, but it was rumoured that the body belonged to a porter and not Edward. Some theories state that he didn't die until much later. A letter called the Fieschi letter was supposedly sent to Edward III from an Italian priest who claimed that his father escaped prison with the servant's help and became a hermit in the Holy Roman Empire. If he did die, the timing of his death was very suspicious as it benefited Mortimer's agenda. Most believe that Edward was killed on the orders of his wife Isabella and the new regime. The stories told soon after suggested that he was killed by an assassin with a hot poker, and Isabella and Mortimer became very unpopular after his death. Edward III overthrew governance of Mortimer and his mother, arrested Mortimer and executed him for treason. One of the many charges of treason was for the murder of his father, Edward II. Did Mortimer really order the assassination of Edward II, or did he die naturally, or even escape? I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment below what you think happened.